When I dip, you dip. We dip. There's an old method that seems to have lost a lot of popularity recently. It used to be the fast way to paint models. Then these crazy contrasts and speed paints suddenly come along and, well, it's become a bit of a lost art. But I say it still has its place. My last few videos featuring one-page rules Jackals units, I was so in love with the models that I wanted to do my best on them, so spent a lot of time and skill. But I think that may have given the wrong impression that they're quite difficult to paint. All of those small parts and pieces can be deceiving, but I want to show how simple they can be as well, on these Jackal Stalkers. Like all of my Jackals so far, I'm going to start by priming these guys in a dark red oxide, which is just red oxide mixed with some primer black. This will just make sure that when I do the base colors and the dip later, that there will be something other than pure black in the recesses where the wash will inevitably settle. Though if you can only prime using spray, spray black first, then just apply a thinned down red oxide and black mix all over it. It doesn't matter that it's patchy, just that it makes its way into all the nooks and crannies. The point here is to make sure that we start from a dark overall color, so for something more cool overall, a dark blue would work, or if painting nature, a dark green. Just think of what the average color of your color scheme is, and start with that. The next stage is where most of the actual hard work comes in, and that's to base coat everything. For my guys, I'm just going to use the same color scheme I've been using for the last couple of videos. The fur in light earthy browns, with the hands and feet being painted lighter, the leather in dark brown, the straps in a more orange brown, metals and metallics, and the few cloth bits are done in an earthy green, which is mostly just brown with a bit of green mixed in. It's always good practice to make sure each of these gets a few coats each, just to make sure that they're even. When doing the base coats this way, it's always best to work from inside to outside. So start with the underpads of the chest piece before doing the plates of it, fur before doing the belts, and so on. But this is also a good place for a nice tip, which if you need to get some color somewhere deep on a model, like behind a cloak or something, but without getting that color on other parts that you may have already painted, clean the brush and get it to a point. Then just put a dot of paint on the tip of the brush. If you can wiggle that dot of paint past everything, then the rest of your brush can touch anything it wants, and since there's no paint in that part of the brush, you won't get colors anywhere you don't want them. This is normally what we would go over the dip with. I feel like now though would be a good time to journey a bit and push and practice some highlighting skills. I like to do this before instead of after, because the overall wash that will get applied will stain some of the lighter highlights, giving them saturation in addition to the lightness. Since the chest plate is the lightest part of the model, I'm going to start by making a mix for that, just adding white to the color I made the base color out of. Then using the side of the brush, I'm going to add edge highlights, just to the edges where I can reach my brush at this angle. So if it seems difficult to get to, leave it. This is the beginner level after all. For other colors, it will be a bit of the same idea, adding just a bit of white to the base we used. And for this, I usually suggest using a white ink instead of a paint. It will help the paint flow a little bit better, but also put far less white pigment into the mix, so it will let some of the color show through more. For the straps, it'll be edge highlighting again, but because they're wrapped around the cylindrical wrists and ankles, there's no need to highlight all the way 360 around them. Just pick the most visible part to the outside of the model and using the edge of the brush again just to pick out the edges along a line going down that cylinder. That's really all we need to sell the effect, and the point is to get the most while keeping it easy. For the belt-like straps around him, instead of trying an edge highlight, we can instead do a very simple stipple, using just the white into the base color again and getting the brush to a point using the palette or a paper towel. Using that point, I want to put like 4 or 5 dots spread out over where the belt buckle connects to the leather. This will add just a little bit of wear and texture as a highlight. The last bit of texturing that isn't necessary, but I just want everyone to try, is some fur grain. Using the same formula of just a bit of white in the base colors, use the tip of the brush to swipe thin lines randomly around the model, in the direction the fur should be flowing, so usually down the arm or the leg. When unsure how to get a thin, single stroke, I find the best course of action is to pretend you're Bart and Lisa in a fight. Start swiping the brush, and then just continue with that motion, getting closer and closer to the model until they've connected. The classic way dip used to be done was with these cans of polymer finish, and we'd literally dip the model into it. Contrast and speed paint have kind of seen people moving away from this method though, in favor of more variety of color you get from those, but the effect is pretty much the same, a heavy wash that fills in color and contrast. So I'll have to make my own, and I want to show two ways to apply it. For the mix, I want it to spread quite easily, so use an airbrush thinner to keep things thin, and I want it to dry matte, so a matte medium as well. I want it to be a wet consistency between these two, but not exactly watery either, something that sticks a bit to the side of the well. Then I'll add my color, starting with an ink. Since inks stain more, this will do more work of colorizing most of the model, even the stuff that doesn't sit in the recesses. Then lastly, for this model anyway, I'm going in with the red oxide again. Not too much, as it's a very opaque color, but this is what I want sitting in those recesses over the whole model. I decided this wasn't dark enough though, so just to bring it to the level I want, I added some black ink to supplement the brown ink. The first way to apply it to the model is of course with the brush. Use a larger brush with a full body for this, and really saturate the bristles. It doesn't matter if it seems like way too much for this first bit, since the plan is to start spreading it out after. Make sure it pools in all the crevices, but as we spread it out, if it looks like it's pooling somewhere too much, go back in with the brush to soak up some more and spread it out further. We don't want to start adding more wash to the brush until we like how everything sits while it's wet. Then start adding a little bit more to the brush each time, spreading it out until the whole thing is soaked, but not flooded. The second method works even better if you have the right tool, and that's an airbrush. By putting this wet mixture into it, we can soak the surface of the model a little more quickly and evenly, while controlling how much each bit gets flooded. But on top of that, the air from the airbrush does something really fun for us, and that's to push the wash into the cracks, way easier than we can do with a brush, as it'll form way less air bubbles in those really thin and deep recesses. The last step is the cleanup. While mostly I'd say this can be just called done here, with just a bit of cleanup we can get the model to pop a little bit more over a tabletop distance. First step of the cleanup is some extra highlights. These guys have quite a bit of damage on them, as they're the scrappiest of the canines in the army, so I want to pick out that damage by giving them a highlight. The dip took care of the shades, so using the highlight color from before, I just want to go in and highlight the bottom edge of all the scratches, which will spotlight them from further away. Smaller details like eyes can be done at this point too, though this comes with the caveat that you should only bother if you really want to. The secret to good eyes on models sometimes is to not paint them at all. When we look at models overall, no one really misses the fact that an eye goes unpainted, but everyone notices an eye done too large or janky, so practice on a few if you can, but no pressure here. Lastly, in the original dip method, the final finish would end up really glossy. It was par for the nature of the floor stain used. Here, I added the matte already to the stain, but just in case, we always want to finish up with an even finish, so either matte or satin, but give the model a full spray to protect and unify the ending look. For the brush method, I really like how the paint pooled around the model in those deep recesses, giving everything a nice outline and separation. It did stain weirdly in a few places and does take a little bit longer to get on, but not that much longer. For the airbrush method, I had to be in close to show off what was going on camera, but realistically, we could flood the whole model in one go with more room and distance. The coverage is more even and stains a few more of the flat surfaces as well as the outlines, but still unifies everything together for a solid final piece. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one, or just other fun things to do with painting miniatures. And until next time, enjoy your own painting journey.